You guys know how it goes. You just get back from the match, you just got back from a trip to the range. It's time to hunker down and do some brass prep. Bad news, I don't have a secret that's going to make it go away. Good news is I have some tips and tricks that'll make it a little bit easier at least. Let's get into it. So I always start with cleaning. I do a dry tumble. Some of this is specific to dry tumbling, but a little bit will correlate to wet tumbling as well. And we're keeping it super simple with this. There's not a lot of tips or tricks I can give you for tumbling. The one thing I wanted to make sure to mention though is that if you are using an additive, which 99.99% of people do, of a wax or even this specific like brass polish, just be careful the amount that you're using. It's really easy to over polish or over wax, I guess would probably be a better way to put it, your brass. And the way I found out that I was putting way too much wax in there was whenever I started annealing. Whenever I would heat that brass up, some of my cases were so heavily covered in wax that it would actually start to drip off as the case was heating up. And imagine what that does to the chamber. You're messing with the dimensions of your brass. And so just be cognizant of it. This is a fun part of the process. Everybody has their own kind of witch's brew to get the best looking brass. So have fun, just be smart. Don't put a bunch of gunk in your tumbler. And this goes for wet tumbling too. There's some wash and waxes. I've seen some people put crazy stuff in their wet tumblers too, guys. It's not specific just to the dry tumbling folks. So, like I said, not much to talk about with dry tumbling, but wanted to touch base nonetheless. Annealing. Most specifically in this case, flame annealing. Because if you have an amp annealer, you won't have to worry about any of this. But if you have a flame annealer like me, the tip that I have for you is how to set up your annealing machine so that you're not under annealing your brass. Why do I say it like that? Well, because I think most people are under annealing their brass. Every video you see out there is how not to over anneal your brass. And that is a legitimate concern, but I think that most people are so afraid of over annealing their brass that they're actually not even annealing it enough. And if you're not annealing your brass enough, it's actually a complete waste of time, money, and effort to even do this step. So how do I set up my annealing? Get the room dark. This is not mine. I took this from Cortina back when he used to do a flame annealer. Get the room dark, start your setup, get it tuned to where, like what he says, the brass is just starting to turn red before it dumps out. Except in my case, I actually will let it get to the red point. So you'll see it'll start to get red, and then there's a point where it is red. I wait until it is red, and there's not a lot of time in between when it's turning red and when it is red. It's just less than a second probably, but that period of time makes all the difference in the world, because before I would wait till it's starting to turn red, then I would back it off a couple, but now I actually wait till it's starting to turn red, I add a couple. And that's made a world of difference. There's a lot of metallurgists that were saying that there's a curve to annealing brass, and that most people aren't getting to the right portion in that, and so they're not seeing the benefits. And they were right in my case. And I bet a lot of people don't even realize this. So that's my tip for annealing. Try it out. I think that you'll see the results. Your numbers will show it. Your groups will show it. Your brass will just be better all around. Sizing. Probably the best tip that I can give you for sizing is not to mess around with trying to adjust your die up and down in the press to set your shoulder bump. Instead, buy these Reading competition show holders. They are different heights by exactly 2 thousandths on each show holder. So that allows you to set up the press to where you're still having the cam over, which is the most accurate and consistent way to have the press set up for this process, but still be able to adjust and bump that shoulder back 2 thousandths more each time that you change the show holder, so that you're getting that perfect amount of shoulder setback. That way you're not overworking your brass. It's very consistent and accurate. It's very easy. Once you have that show holder for that combination of brass and chamber, you just stick with that for the rest of that gun and brass's life. It's really straightforward and simple. Like, it doesn't get any easier than that. Besides that, as far as sizing, don't be afraid to try different case lubes. There's a lot of different case lubes out on the market. For some reason, people love to get hung up on one specific brand, but they're all good. I've tried about 7, maybe 8 different brands at this point. My favorite's Reading Imperial Die Wax. This isn't a Redding commercial, I promise. They didn't pay me to say any of these things. Just as far as sizing goes, they make a couple really cool products. But I also really like the Hornady Unique. I really like making my own with the lanolin and isopropyl alcohol. So there's a bunch of different options. The cleanup's a little bit different for each one, so don't be afraid to try different case lubes to figure out which fits best into your process. That brings us to trimming. Trimming is a complicated process, and quite honestly, it's one that I'm still perfecting myself. The thing about trimming is that most everybody wants to be solely focused on the overall length of the brass after they're done trimming. And while that is a very, very important measurement, almost nobody considers, are we trimming our brass squarely? What do I mean by that? Well, here's some footage of a piece of brass that I got from the last match that I shot. The person who owns this brass had their process down pat perfect, is what they told me. Well, here is a piece of brass that has one side of the neck is 4 thousandths shorter than the other side of the neck. This thing is super out of square. I mean, whenever you put it in your calipers, you can just tell. Like, one side is touching, the other side, there's a big gap. That's not because it's in there crooked, it's because your neck is not squarely cut. So whenever you're trimming your brass, every once in a while, make sure that you're trimming it squarely. With a lot of these trimmers, that's one of the biggest issues, is that none of them address it. It's not being trimmed squarely. There's a couple trimmers that do it really well. The majority of them do a really bad job of it. The ones that I have here in front of me are a couple of the ones that do a really bad job of it. So just be aware of it. Trim your brass square. It's going to set you apart from the competition. It's a secret that I've held close up until now. And honestly, I don't think I've ever heard anybody talking about trimming squarely. So do this step, and it's going to help you tremendously to refine your process and get better results. Last but not least, we'll just call this the finishing touches. This is going to be chamfering, deburring, that kind of thing. So they're not a lot. I mean, it's pretty straightforward, right? Chamfer, deburr, you knock the edge off essentially. One of the things that I see a lot of people doing, though, is way overdoing it with the chamfering and deburring. They're making these things into hole punches. Like you just want a very light chamfer, a very light deburr. You want to just hit it with a couple spins, real light, 1, 2, 3, 4. Whatever you do, just do it consistently across the entire lot that you're loading for. A lot of times what I'll do is I'll just stick that little chamfer in there, and I'll just very little pressure whatsoever. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. I just get in a rhythm of doing it on each one. You can chalk these up in a drill press or like a brass prep station. That definitely helps speed things along. But I mean, it's dealer's choice. There's a lot of different options. Just don't overdo it. It's very easy to do that way too much and turn it into something that's way too thin. You're gonna damage your brass life. It's gonna cause a bunch of issues in the long run. The other thing that I like to do, and this is just at the very first time I'm getting brass, and this is only in terms of the brass that is produced in a certain way, and that is with brass that is the flash holes are punched instead of drilled. There's these tools here. I have one from RCBS, one from K&M, that will actually deburr that flash hole, and that is a really important part of the process for me. That really helps you get a uniform ignition, because whenever they punch that flash hole through, that metal's got to go somewhere, and it comes out the backside on the inside of the case so you can't see it. But there's a burr that sticks through, and some of it sometimes is pretty big and pretty bad. And so using these tools here will help knock that down, and actually that burr will impede the ignition from your primer and cause your powder to catch and burn lopsided. So having that be trimmed off is really a crucial part for my part of the process. I've seen really good results from it. I've tested it both ways. If you're gonna use cheap brass, do that. Buy this tool once. I like this K&M. It's got features that none of the other ones do. Buy once, cry once. Get it nice. Do it the first time that you prep that brass. You don't have to worry about it the rest of the time. Lastly, don't touch your primer pockets, people. Don't clean them. Don't jab anything in them whatsoever. All you're going to be doing is causing way more problems than you're going to be doing any good. You don't need to be using a primer pocket cleaning tool. It's just, if you're even off cant a little bit, you're going to gouge the inside of those primer pockets. That's going to cause issues. You're going to decrease the brass life. Don't worry about uniforming your primer pockets. That's stupid too. Tumble them, clean them that way. If you want to knock the primer out before you tumble them, more power to you. That'll clean it out if it's really that big of a deal to you. But don't be sticking stuff in your primer pockets. It's just asking for problems, and it's just going to create way more headaches than it's going to do good. Let me know if you have some tips and tricks down below. I want to hear what your process is. My process is ever evolving, so I definitely want to know what you do if you do it differently than me. Like, share, subscribe. Definitely send this to a buddy, like the one that had their brass that was 4/1000 out of square on that neck. Send it to your buddy that's like that, who thinks their process is down pat, but they're just doing it all whack. Remember guys, be safe out there. We'll see you next time here at Precision Rifle Network.